This is not just the story of a man who started a world war. This is the story of how arrogance, hatred, and blind followers destroyed millions, and how the world watched in silence. He wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a king. He was a homeless man who wanted to be an artist, but became a tyrant. The Quran tells us about the rise and fall of pharaohs. This is one of our time. This is the true story of Adolf Hitler. Let's start the unlikely beginning. Before Adolf Hitler became a dictator and plunged the world into war, he was just another lost soul in the streets of Vienna. In 1907, at the age of 18, Hitler arrived in Vienna with a dream: to become a renowned artist. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, confident in his talent. But reality hit hard. He was rejected twice. The Academy's board told him he lacked skill in painting people, though his architectural sketches were decent. This rejection deeply wounded him. His ambition was crushed. What most people don't know is that Hitler wasn't always filled with hate. At this stage of his life, he had Jewish friends. His landlord in Vienna was Jewish. He even admired some aspects of Jewish culture. But over the years, something began to change. After the death of his beloved mother in 1907, his mental and emotional state grew darker. He lived in homeless shelters and men's hostels. He sold postcards and small paintings to survive. Vienna was a tough city, cold, political, and full of ethnic diversity. Hitler, poor and isolated, started reading radical nationalist pamphlets that blamed Jews and immigrants for the empire's struggles. Slowly, that early bitterness began to harden into ideology. He became obsessed with German nationalism, even though he was born in Austria. He believed the German people were superior, and the Austrian Empire, with all its multiculturalism, was corrupt and weak. One key influence during this period was Karl Lueger, Vienna's mayor. Lueger was a skilled politician who used anti-Semitic rhetoric to gain popularity, though many believe he didn't fully believe it himself. But for young Hitler, Lueger's methods became a blueprint. He realized words could be more powerful than weapons. Despite his poverty, Hitler didn't work a regular job. He refused to work for lesser people. He believed he was destined for greatness. But in truth, he was aimless, angry, and increasingly isolated from reality. Between 1909 and 1913, he lived mostly in shelters and flophouses. He avoided relationships, didn't trust easily, and wrote nothing of value. This part of Hitler's life is still somewhat mysterious. Few personal letters, no deep friendships, no real achievements. Just a man drifting through a city, collecting grievances. But here's the haunting part. While most men with similar pasts fade into obscurity, Hitler didn't. He remembered every insult, every failure, every rejection. He stored them like fuel. In this cold, gray world of Vienna, built on broken dreams and bitterness, the seeds of the 20th century's greatest tragedy were planted. The soldier nobody knew. When World War I broke out in 1914, Adolf Hitler was living in Munich, still aimless and poor. But unlike many others, he was thrilled by the news. He volunteered immediately for the German army, not the Austrian one, despite being born in Austria. He claimed he felt more German than Austrian. He was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. His job? A messenger, delivering commands between the front and the rear. It was one of the most dangerous roles in trench warfare. Many of his fellow messengers didn't survive. But Hitler did. He fought at key battles like Ypres, the Somme, and Passchendaele, some of the bloodiest in the war. The mud, the shell fire, the screams of dying men. Hitler experienced it all. He was wounded twice, once in the leg and once in a mustard gas attack in 1918 that temporarily blinded him. He spent the end of the war recovering in a military hospital in Pasewalk. Hitler was a brave soldier. He was awarded the Iron Cross, both second and first class. The first-class version was rare for a low-ranking corporal. But despite his awards, he wasn't popular among his fellow soldiers. They thought he was strange, kept to himself, never talked about women or drank heavily. He never rose in rank because his superiors saw no leadership qualities in him. And then came the collapse. While still in the hospital, Hitler heard the news. Germany had surrendered. The Kaiser had abdicated. The monarchy was gone. For Hitler, it was like a knife to the chest. He couldn't believe it. Germany, in his eyes, hadn't lost on the battlefield. It had been betrayed from within. By politicians. By communists. By Jews. This belief wasn't unique to Hitler. It was called the stab-in-the-back myth, the idea that brave German soldiers were betrayed by weak politicians and traitors at home. But Hitler clung to it harder than most. It became his obsession. In 1919, he was still in the army when he was ordered to spy on a small political group in Munich, the German Workers' Party. But instead of reporting them, he joined them. He found his voice in their meetings. They ranted against Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles. It felt like home. This is where the next chapter of his life began. Not on the battlefield, but behind a podium. But something important happened in the war. Hitler found a purpose. For the first time in his life, he belonged to something greater than himself. And when that was taken away, his anger turned toxic. He wasn't just a failed artist anymore. He wasn't just a homeless drifter. He was a man with a mission, fueled by rage, shaped by war, and determined to never be invisible again. The puppet master rises. By the early 1920s, Germany was falling apart. Inflation was out of control. People carried stacks of money just to buy bread. Millions were unemployed. The country was humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, forced to accept blame for World War I and pay crushing reparations. This was the perfect storm for a man like Hitler. He had joined the German Workers' Party, but he wasn't interested in being just a member. He became its loudest voice. With fiery speeches full of blame and promise, Hitler turned crowds into believers. By 1921, he had taken over the party, renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. He wasn't educated. He wasn't from a noble family. But Hitler had something dangerous, the power of words. He used fear as fuel, pointing fingers at Jews, Marxists, and liberals. He didn't offer facts. He offered feelings, anger, pride, betrayal, and hope. Then came the boldest move yet, the beer hall putsch of 1923. In a Munich beer hall filled with local leaders, Hitler stormed in with armed men and tried to launch a coup. It failed. Police opened fire. People died. Hitler was arrested and sent to prison. Most thought it was the end of his story. But prison gave Hitler something more valuable than freedom, a stage. During his trial, Hitler used the courtroom as a platform. Newspapers printed every word he said. He went from unknown radical to national figure. In prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle. A mix of autobiography and dangerous ideology, it laid out his vision for a future Germany. One ruled by one leader, one people, and no Jews. When he was released, he changed his strategy. No more violence, he'd take power legally. By the late 1920s, the Nazi Party was small. But then the Great Depression hit in 1929. Banks collapsed. Businesses closed. Millions lost their jobs. People were desperate, and desperate people are easy to influence. Hitler promised to restore Germany's pride. He said, "Give me power and I will fix everything." By 1932, the Nazis were the largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. But Hitler still wasn't chancellor. He needed the support of conservative elites, businessmen, military officers, politicians, people who thought they could control him. They were wrong. In January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Just 1 month later, the Reichstag building burned. Hitler blamed communists and convinced the president to pass the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil rights. Weeks later, the Enabling Act was passed, legally giving Hitler the power to rule without parliament. Democracy didn't die with a gun. It died with a law, passed in fear, signed by men who thought they were being clever. By mid-1933, all other parties were banned. The Nazis controlled the courts, the press, the schools. And Hitler, once a homeless drifter, was now the unchallenged ruler of Germany. But the worst was yet to come. The final illusion. True historical account. By 1945, Adolf Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich was falling apart in less than 12. The empire he built on fear and fire was burning from all sides. The Allies had taken France. The Soviets were marching through the east. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were dead. The world had seen gas chambers, mass graves, and the machine of genocide that Hitler had created. But he still refused to surrender. Deep beneath Berlin, Hitler hid in the Führerbunker, a reinforced underground shelter below the shattered streets. He was a shadow of his former self, pale, shaking, and drug-dependent. Witnesses said his hands trembled uncontrollably. He spoke of armies that didn't exist. He gave orders to generals who had already died or defected. Above him, Berlin crumbled. On April 29, 1945, as Soviet tanks closed in, Hitler married Eva Braun, his longtime companion. It was a strange, quiet ceremony, more like a goodbye than a celebration. Just one day later, they both took their own lives. Hitler shot himself in the head. Eva bit into a cyanide capsule. Their bodies were burned with gasoline, just as Hitler had instructed. When the Soviets finally reached the bunker, they found charred remains. No public trial. No last speech. No captured tyrant for history to witness. And that's where the myths began. Because no full body was ever recovered, conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Did Hitler escape? Did he flee to South America? Was his death faked? The Soviet Union remained vague, adding fuel to the rumors. Even today, some believe he lived beyond 1945. But most historians agree, he died in that bunker. What didn't die, though, was the legacy of destruction. By the time the war ended, more than 85 million people had perished. Europe was a graveyard. Entire cities were erased. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration camps. Hitler's hatred didn't just kill, it poisoned generations. And yet, despite the scale of his crimes, his story is still studied, still told, still remembered.
Why?
Because Adolf Hitler didn't just rise with guns. He rose with words. He didn't start as a monster. He became one, slowly, quietly, through bitterness, rage, and lies. He didn't take power overnight. People gave it to him, piece by piece, believing they were safe. And that's the final illusion. That evil comes with horns and warnings. But in truth, it often arrives with promises and applause. The story of Hitler isn't just about one man. It's about how quickly the world can fall when people stop paying attention.